Welcome everyone to Grandmaster Srinath Narayanan taking on IM Sammed Shete. Sammed is from Kolhapur, a strong IM with 1 GM norm. His highest rating was about 2450, but now it has dropped down to 2404. Srinath, of course, a very strong GM but also a fine trainer. Knight f3, d5, he plays e3. This is also known as the Keimer variation because Vincent Keimer plays it a lot. Knight f6 and c4 is on the board. Now, Sammed, what does he do? He plays g6, and this is perhaps not the most testing way to meet the Keimer variation because c takes d5 would have been a nice move, by the way, here. Bishop g7, bishop b2, e castles, and I think now Srinath can take the pawn. The main thing is that now white is left with 2 pawns in the center while black has only 1. So white will have strong control of the center after the pawn push. First, he pushes the queen away, queen d6. But on the other hand, you can see that black can push both of his pawns forward, control the center, use his pieces which are free and open. So in that sense, the position is not at all one-sided and can be very exciting. a6 played so that the queen later does not get hassled by the move knight b5. Srinath castles, and e5 is a nice move, grabbing some space in the center. Srinath pushes his pawn to d4 and now black must take. He pushes his pawn here and Srinath instantly jumps in. This was maybe not the best because after knight g5, queen e7, there is this move queen c1 threatening bishop a3, which would have given white a very big advantage. But after knight e5, knight c6, it feels like black is the one in the driver's seat. Queen c1, Srinath does find this very nice idea of the pin here, and Sammed takes it, which is a good decision. He's ready to sacrifice an exchange, bishop a3, and now a good idea is to go here and after take, to take this back, and then after d, queen e5 to play bishop d6. But instead, he sacks a piece. He goes knight f3 check in order to open up the white king. It's natural, you must take this knight either with the pawn or the bishop, but bishop takes is met with queen e6, and now the problem is if you save your bishop here, rook e8 and black is okay. So he goes, takes with the pawn, queen moves, and now bishop takes rook. Sammed interposes, attacks the bishop takes the pawn, and now in this ensuing position you will see that black is an exchange down, but the white king is slightly weak, and queen h3 prepares later for the bishop to move in. It also attacks the queen, the knight can jump in, so Srinath has to remain very careful here. Sammed has made a calculated risk, but a very nice move by Srinath, hitting the queen. His center is also quite intact, and next if his queen joins into the defense, it would be completely fine. So queen h4 played, putting pressure on the e4 pawn. Queen e3, I like this move because even if you go knight g4, there is queen g3 defending everything. So c5 played. He's trying to create squares for his pieces because if d5, then maybe later his bishop could sit on this diagonal. Srinath takes the pawn and Sammed moves his bishop out in a rapid time control. This is a dangerous position for white, but Srinath seems to be very confident. He moves his knight to d5 right into the center of the board, attacking all these important squares. And now what does Sammed do? He plays knight h5, and maybe the idea is to take and put your knight on f4. Rook c1 played just to defend the pawn here, and g5. Sammed is trying for something should work, but knight c7. Srinath is unfazed. He just puts his knight over there and says, I'm going to chop off at least one of your piece. He takes on e6, pawn takes. This is very good conversion. Queen h3, now forcing the queen trade because if you move the queen away, the knight would hang. So he must take. Also the pawn is being attacked here on e6. So takes, knight f4, hitting the bishop, and now very important to play h5 and start to try and defend this position. But bishop c5 is a bad move because now this is pinned, and now after b4 it is a completely nice position. The calculation is b4, bishop f2 check, king f2, knight d3 check, king e3, And once you take here, you take on e6 with a check and you drop. And if you take here with the rook, which is very, very much possible, I have an intermediate move with my rook coming in. And so here b4, Sammed goes h5. He doesn't move his bishop, but now Srinath is completely winning. You can see there Sammed knew that he didn't calculate this very well, and Srinath actually really sharp with his calculations. And now after rook d1, he's getting his rook into the game. The pawns on the board are even, so the knight is clearly inferior to the rook. He goes king g2, moves his king up. Just you have to be careful of various knight forks in the position. Check comes in, king f7, and now another check on d7, very likely, so that the b7 pawn falls. And Srinath calculates calmly, gives a check, and now the c pawn will run down the board. So Sammed resigns, and the nice thing is that after this game, Sammed is smiling and he says, instead of taking the pawn on c5, I should have played h5. And Srinath, of course, very measured in his reaction there. Yes, it would have been better to play your pawn to h5 there instead of taking the pawn, but still white was the side for choice there. And it was an interesting game. Sammed had his chances in the opening, but once he gave up an exchange, Srinath was in control.